What's up guys, Drew here from Punch Punch Magic, doing something a little different? A little different. Just a little different. Think back to all the huge video game sci-fi franchises out there like Halo, Mass Effect, Fallout, even Call of Duty in some cases. All of those big names had one game that really shot them into the mainstream and solidified their success. Some of these big names, like Mass Effect, were huge gambles for their publishers because they had entire trilogies or franchises planned out from the very beginning. But they still proved to be successful. Today we're going to be looking at a game that proves that even if you have a plan for this big, huge, expansive universe, that doesn't mean you're necessarily going to be successful. This game had a ton of promise and talent behind it, and yet it still crashed and burned. Some of you can probably tell by the gameplay behind me, but today we're going to be talking about Advent Rising. Advent Rising, developed by GlyphX and published by Majesco Entertainment, is such an interesting case study. It was a game that had everything going for it. A plan for a trilogy, a hugely successful sci-fi writer working on the project, and a publisher that was so confident in the game's success that they were willing to have $1 million contest held around its launch. There was a huge amount of hype surrounding the game before its launch, with Majesco promising it to be the next Halo or even bigger than that. And Advent Rising had all of the makings of a potential hit. Incredible orchestral music, interesting art and world design, a vast story that was spread across the galaxy, and unique gameplay that helped make it stand out. But unfortunately, not enough time was spent on each of these elements in development to make them work fluently together as one cohesive package. What we are left with is a game that feels unfinished thanks to people who are too concerned about the bigger, more financially beneficial picture. Going into Advent Rising, I was ready for a disappointing experience. When the game launched back in 2005, when I was a kid, I was bombarded with reviews that stated that the game had a lot to say, but getting all of that information was a frustrating and kind of boring experience. The show X-Play, one of my favorite gaming shows on G4 as a kid, gave the game a scathing review. They cited the game's horrible control scheme as the main reason as to why they saw Advent Rising as a massive dud, as well as a messy story that they found ultimately boring.
And then there's these bad aliens called Seekers. I don't know what they're seeking, but from the look of it, it's a role in the next Halo game.
They even went so far as to compare the game to one of their least favorite games of all time, Drake of the 99 Dragons.
Huh. Now that sounds familiar.
What you get is Drake chaotically throwing his arms every which way like a sub-homicidal semaphore session.
No, the game isn't as bad as that, but it has the slideshow effect of a bad frame rate, graphics as stunning as a bowl of rice, and it's also clearly suckled from the creative teat of Halo that the Bungie guys must be feeling mighty tender right now.
I took this review to heart and promptly forgot about Advent Rising altogether, never to look back on it until years later. It wasn't just poor reviews that caused problems for the game at launch either. Remember that $1 million contest I talked about before? Well, that contest required those who purchased the game to find a bunch of hidden tokens throughout the game. The developers were to keep track of everyone's progress with Xbox Live, which was kind of a big deal at the time, especially for Microsoft. Obviously, though, no one spent too much time working on the contest because an exploit was found immediately at launch that gave users a huge advantage. This exploit allowed Xbox Live users to manipulate the time and date on their Xboxes in order to give themselves more time to find each hidden token. Once this exploit was found, Majesco decided to cancel the contest, instead opting to give players who asked 2 free games from a certain list of their published works. This was a massive embarrassment considering the contest was printed on almost every single copy of the game. Even the copy that I own has the damn thing on it. These problems ultimately led to Advent Rising having abysmal sales at launch, and even with a small cult following developing around the game and it having a PC release just a month after Xbox, it never fully recovered. Eventually, Majesco ceased development on the future Advent games, and information on the franchise after has been sparse. But what about the game itself, not just all the controversy and problems surrounding it at launch? I wanted to find out if Advent Rising really was as bad as everybody had told me, if it was really just this messy overall experience. What I found out, though, rather surprisingly, is that the game actually might have just been way ahead of its time, rather than just necessarily bad. Let's start with the one thing that most people will agree is pretty good about this game: its story. You play as Gideon Wyatt, a young pilot who has an older brother, Ethan. Ethan is known across the galaxy as a war hero, even though we don't really learn why exactly. All we see is that he's incredibly respected, and by proxy, we are seen as someone standing in his shadow. At the beginning of the game, Gideon is shown as eager to surpass his brother. He's cocky and takes advantage of his brother's status to get away with certain things. Ethan, on the other hand, is wise and understanding of Gideon's plight. He wants his brother to succeed on his own, which is why he brings him along on a very important mission to give him a chance at acquiring his own notoriety and glory. This mission is to escort a human ambassador onto an alien vessel in order to make first contact. Gideon is visibly nervous about this task, but I mean, who the hell wouldn't? I typically hate this sort of thing in sci-fi films or games, where when people make first contact, they seem to think it's no big deal. Everyone except Gideon is acting like this is just another day on the job.
Here, you put it in your ear. You're expendable.
Thanks. Gideon used to put shiny things in his ear when he was a baby, too.
I know we are seeing mostly Gideon's perspective, but with Ethan cracking jokes and even the freaking human ambassador taking the time to be clever...
If there's nothing we can do, then why did you come?
Gideon, you're not the ambassador.
If there's nothing we can do, then why did you come?
I just got incredibly annoyed. Once the contact crew boards the ship, they are greeted by some aliens who look intimidating as all hell. They then give Gideon, who is quote-unquote expendable, a translator to insert into his ear. Gideon winces in pain, but then says this later to the others.
It's the universal translator. It's painless. Ah, okay, that doesn't feel good. It's painless. Ah, painless. Ah, it's painless.
Oh, so Gideon is just gonna blatantly lie to their faces? Oh, okay. So they continue onto the alien ship and meet the Orleans? I'm not really sure. Gideon and his team are then told that the Orleans have been looking for them for centuries. This is because long ago, humans used to be powerful gods with amazing abilities, until they were hunted nearly to extinction. The Orleans, I think that's right, worship humans, to the point that it's even called their religion. The purpose of this meeting isn't just to boost humanity's ego, though. The Aurelians warn the ambassador that another alien race, the Seekers, have also found them and are on their way to finish off the human race once and for all. They hurry back to the space station, but before they can warn the others, the Seekers attack, setting the rest of the story in motion. I can't really go much further into the story without getting into spoilers, so this is going to be your official spoiler warning. I don't normally do spoiler warnings like this in the games that I play, but that's usually because they're actually pretty difficult to get. You have to get an old console, you have to find these games secondhand or off eBay where they can be really expensive or just hard to find. But this game is still pretty readily available on the PC platform, so if this game and story interests you whatsoever, then skip to this time code to avoid spoilers. If not, then keep going. The Seekers relentlessly invade the human space station, scanning and killing any human in their path. Gideon eventually finds an escape pod, and the game gives you a choice of either saving your girlfriend, Olivia, or your brother, Ethan. At this point, Olivia has been given very little plot development, so I chose to go with Ethan. This choice does have some rippling effects in the story, but nothing too significant until the very end. Gideon and Ethan ride an escape pod all the way down to Udamea, or this game's Earth equivalent. The Seekers are hot on their tail though, and before long they are completely swarming the planet. You then try your best to fight off the invasion, but before long it becomes painfully obvious that humanity has failed. The Seekers are dragging a massive asteroid towards Udamea to completely destroy the planet and everything on it. Gideon, Ethan, or Olivia if you choose her, and another human pilot named Marin manage to escape the planet before the asteroid can hit. But unfortunately, the same can't be said for anyone else on the planet. Yep, that's right, you are now looking at the last 3 remaining humans in the entire galaxy. The game does not take very long to completely punch you in the gut, doesn't it? Even though this should be a terrible experience for our characters though, they still manage to find the time to crack jokes about their situation. How the hell are we supposed to take the story and its events seriously if the characters themselves don't take it seriously? If it seems like I'm ragging on this game's characters a lot, it's only because I'm disappointed in how flat they are. The rest of the story is rather interesting and asks a lot of cool questions that don't normally come up in stories like this. For example, the game considers the political ramifications of what the Seekers are doing, since it's essentially mass racial genocide. It asks the question what it would be like to be the last living members of an entire race, and what kind of burden that can be. Advent Rising's characters and dialogue are easily the worst parts of the story, but they don't drag the story down so much as to make it unmemorable. Let's get back to the story at hand. After Gideon spends some time training with the Aurelians, he learns how to control his human powers. Over time, you unlock more and more abilities to use as Gideon becomes more powerful and closer to becoming a true human. After a few back and forth bouts with the Seekers, Ethan, or Olivia if you chose her, drowns after your ship sinks on the Aurelian homeworld. Now Gideon and Marin are the only two humans left in the galaxy. This is when the game kicks the revenge plot into high gear, giving Gideon no other goal other than to avenge his entire race. This is also when the plot gets confusing. Convoluted? Full? It just kind of goes all over the place. The confusion mostly comes from the fact that the game starts to add plot twists to the story out the wazoo. You learn from a Seeker leader that the Seekers are somehow trying to help the humans, which is never really fully explained. You also learn that there's an Aurelian coup being set up that will turn the remaining humans, Gideon and Marin, into the Seekers in return for safety of the Aurelian race. Then a couple key characters die, then Barack Obama shows up. Wait, what? This game came out in 2005 and there's an assassin character named Barack Obama. Then there is a mysterious android that seems to want to kill Gideon for some reason. Then we learn that Gideon isn't the only one who's been learning powers. Marin has as well, and that he and her may actually be falling in love. Aww. Then the credits roll and it seems as though the groundwork for a trilogy has been appropriately set, with hope driving us to the conclusion. But then as soon as the credits finish, an epilogue begins. Even after all that exhausting stuff that happens within just a few hours, the game has one final twist up its sleeve. Remember when I said that your choice of who to save at the beginning of the game would have an effect on the ending? Well, that is because whoever you didn't choose to save has been transformed into a super powerful being called a Corium? Corome? Not really sure. Apparently eons ago, humans were actually just creatures that worshipped the Corome, to the point of imitating their appearance and even going as far as to learn to use their abilities. The Corome calls humans blasphemous creatures and admits that they commanded the Seekers to completely destroy the human race all those years ago. This is odd to me because if Olivia, or Ethan, were somehow able to transform into these Corome, does that mean that the other humans potentially could have too? What distinguishes a potential Corome from a regular human? They didn't seem too different. Also, if the one that we saved somehow lived, would they have also transformed? All of these questions come out of the blue right as the game is ending, which is fine once you remember that the game is supposed to have 2 sequels. But I can't help but feel like the conclusion we got before the credits was somehow better for Advent Rising as a singular experience. Anyway, Gideon then fights the Corome in an incredibly annoying boss battle. It's mostly annoying because for the entire fight you are left to your own devices to figure out how to best the boss. This sounds fun on paper, but in practice it just feels like a trial and error experience. The end result of the battle, though, is surprisingly brutal, and ends satisfyingly enough. Then Gideon is transported to an ice planet where he wanders until he succumbs to the cold. He is then found by a creature known only as the Stranger, who states,
"Come with me, human. There is much to be done."
And then the ominous, but now hilariously embarrassing words, "to be continued," come on the screen. It's hard to criticize Advent Rising's story too much when you consider that it was supposed to be one part of a huge franchise. Yes, there was a planned trilogy, but I'm sure there was also parts of a planned franchise in comic books, maybe cartoons or movies or something like that. I'm sure it was this big, huge universe that they had planned. And a lot of the problems that I had with this game's story probably would have been solved when it comes to the characters, the plot holes, and maybe some of the questions that come up right at the end. Overall, I'd say the story for Advent Rising is good. Not very good, as some people would say, because you have to look at it just as a singular piece of media since the rest of it doesn't exist. You can't really excuse that, you have to acknowledge it, and when recommending the game for you guys, I have to acknowledge that this is an unfinished story, however justified that is. Now let's move on to the part of the game that most people would probably consider to be very bad. The gameplay. Advent Rising is infamous for having a confusing and somewhat frustrating shooting mechanic that was naively coined as innovative. I wasn't quite ready for what I was about to experience, and I had heard so many bad things about this game that I was expecting to be just completely disappointed, as I said earlier. But this is the part of the game that actually managed to really surprise me. It surprised me because it wasn't nearly as bad as I was expecting. Okay, I'm gonna give you a quick rundown of how Advent Rising plays. You walk around, dodge, roll, and melee like any other action third-person shooter. You have human and alien weapons that you can dual wield and shoot independently with the left and right triggers, as well as various different grenades at your disposal. The game also has a great system that lets you upgrade weapons and abilities as you use them. All of these things alone make for a fun experience, and if it weren't for one thing in particular, this game would be seen as very fun by most people, at least as far as I'm concerned. But what sets Advent Rising apart is its, innovative lock-on mechanic called flick targeting. What this does is it allows you to quickly lock onto an enemy by flicking the right analog stick in the enemy's direction. This was added to try and give combat a distinct pace and flow that set it apart from other shooters and helped it feel almost like a Matrix or John Woo film. However, one major oversight, which seems to be a theme for this game, is the fact that the camera movement in the game is also tied to that right analog stick. This means that you will constantly lock onto enemies all over the place even when you're just trying to explore or get around a level. This makes the beginning of the game an incredibly frustrating experience and makes the gameplay feel completely broken and unfinished. I can't tell you how many times the game's flick targeting system got me killed, even up until the very end of the game. Even so, I don't think the flick targeting system is broken, but instead it has an incredibly sharp and sudden learning curve that the player must hurdle in order to enjoy it. Look at a game like Elite Dangerous. It's incredibly popular and looks amazing, which draws a lot of people to purchase it. Unfortunately, the game has a very unforgiving and difficult to grasp learning curve right at the very beginning that usually pushes most people away. However, getting over that learning curve is very satisfying and helps give you a greater sense of control over the game as a result. Does that mean that Elite Dangerous has bad gameplay just because some people get too frustrated with it? I would argue no, it's just not for everyone. A lot of the same things can be said about Advent Rising. While no, it's not nearly as complex as Elite Dangerous, its learning curve is just as sharp and abrupt. However, speaking as someone who has actually gotten over Advent Rising's learning curve, I can safely say that Advent Rising is one of the most fun games I've played in recent memory. It's very difficult to explain, but once you get used to the controls, the game starts to have a flow that feels like nothing else. Once the abilities, which are essentially beefed up force powers from Star Wars, are thrown into the mix, the game opens up beautifully. You start to mix regular weapons with powerful abilities, grenades, and sometimes even objects to gain the upper hand in combat. I can't overstate how much fun I had while playing the last few hours of the game. Once Advent Rising starts firing on all cylinders, it becomes an incredibly memorable and fun experience. Did I still occasionally die due to some aiming mishaps? Of course. But could almost all of those instances have been chalked up as user error? Yes. As I said before, Advent Rising is made up of a bunch of great parts that are unfortunately lessened by the shooting mechanics. But if you learn how to effectively use those mechanics, you'll be able to fully experience the game as it was intended, and man oh man, is it fun. Now all of this isn't saying that I don't realize that the flick targeting system is flawed. It is. There are some things that could have been done to it to make it even better. For example, I feel like if the game had allowed you to click the stick in instead of flicking it to lock onto enemies, that would have felt a little bit more natural and would have given you a little bit more control than the game gives you now. And this isn't just baseless speculation that I have here that this would have helped the game in any way. There's actual proof of it that exists in the PC version of the game. Ah yes, glorious PC gameplay. Very rarely is a third-person game improved by playing on a keyboard and mouse, but here it works wonderfully. This is mostly due to the fact that the flick targeting mechanic doesn't exist as it does on the Xbox. Instead, you can lock onto enemies by scrolling up or down with the mouse's scroll wheel. In fact, thanks to the change, you can completely ignore the lock-on system altogether if you'd like. Just point towards enemies and shoot. It works great. This is why, while I did have a blast with the game on the Xbox, the PC port of Advent Rising is the superior version in my eyes. What's more, you can download an unofficial fan-made patch called Advent Revision that ups the available resolutions, smooths out the cutscenes, fixes a lot of bugs, and adds a lot of other story bits that weren't originally present on the PC version. This mod is great and makes the game more than playable on modern systems, even if mine would crash every 30 minutes or so. This is probably due to me running it on Windows 10 though, so if you're having trouble, I'd recommend running the game in compatibility mode or something. Possibly the best thing about the PC version though, and unlike most of the games I review, you can still easily get the game right now. Seriously, it's right here on Steam and GOG. The GOG version is only $6 and includes a bunch of extras like a behind-the-scenes doc and a comic book. If watching this video has piqued your interest in Advent Rising whatsoever, I would highly recommend trying the game out. The gameplay has aged surprisingly well. And while the same can't be said for the story, maybe if we get enough people trying out and talking about the game, then we can get some attention about a potential sequel. That's actually a big sticking point for me here. I do think that Advent Rising has the potential to come back into the limelight. But even if it did, would a sequel even be possible? I mean, who owns the rights? Where are the original developers? Where are the original creators of the story? As for the rights, as far as I can tell, Majesco still owns the Advent license. This would be fine if Majesco didn't just merge with a company last year called Polarity TE. Polarity TE is a biotech company that seems to specialize in self-regenerative something? I don't know. Anyway, I think it's safe to say that no video games are going to come out of Majesco anytime soon, though the license may now be up for grabs for the first time in a long time. As for the original developers, well, their site no longer exists, and according to their Wikipedia page, the only game they ever produced was Advent Rising, and they have since disappeared. Things become a little more interesting when we look at the creative team behind the game. Orson Scott Card, the incredibly famous sci-fi writer who wrote the script for Advent Rising, has fallen down a controversy wormhole in the past few years. Controversy is putting it rather lightly, too. Wait. Barack Obama? Barack Obama. It all makes sense. Orson Scott Card traveled back in time to 2005 to warn us about Barack Obama. But seriously, with everything he's got going on right now, I doubt anyone will let Card touch the property with a 10-foot pole. But there is still one person out there. One person who has always wanted to continue the franchise, but just didn't have the means. That person is Donald Mustard, and yes, that's my favorite condiment, let's just get that out of the way. Mustard was the brainchild behind all of Advent Rising. He came up with the universe, the plan for the trilogy, and had an entire story planned out. The only reason he brought Orson Scott Card on board is because he needed someone to write the story in a professional way, and come on, in 2005 you're not going to not have one of the most prolific sci-fi writers help mold your universe. Anyway, Donald still works in the industry. Back in 2006, Donald started a new development studio with his brother Jeremy called Chair Entertainment. They are most known for the Infinity Blade mobile games, which are actually really good from what I've heard, and most notably Shadow Complex, which is a fantastic Metroidvania game that I would highly recommend. Since then though, Chair has been bought and seemingly folded into Epic Studios, the makers of Unreal Tournament and Gears of War. Who am I kidding? You guys know who Epic is. Currently it looks like he's helping with a few other games, and mainly Paragon, Epic's new first-person shooter. Donald has stated more than a few times in interviews that he would be interested in continuing Advent Rising if he were given the chance, and I think he is our best bet at getting a sequel. I mean, the timing seems perfect. Majesco has given up on the entertainment business, which means it would probably be willing to sell its Advent license. Donald Mustard, Advent's original creator, works at a high-up position at Epic Studios. Maybe, just maybe, something could happen between those two here. For now, I'll leave the discussion up to you guys. Did you play this game back in the day? What did you think about it? Have you played it again recently? How has your perception changed? I personally think I benefited from not playing the game at launch. With all the bad word of mouth surrounding the game at the time, I can't help but think my opinion of the game would have been influenced somehow. But now I can say that Advent Rising is definitely one of the most fun experiences I've had in a very long time. So I ask you guys to please check this game out. If it's not your thing, that's fine, but if you're like me and you missed out on it back in the day, then you owe it to yourself to at least give it a shot. So many games get lost and forgotten to time. Let's not let this amazing game go to waste and end up like so many others. Hey, I changed shirts. It's because I'm recording this at a later date. So what I didn't realize while I was recording all of this and everything like that is that it's actually been 12 years almost on the dot since Advent Rising launched. This past Wednesday, that's March 31st, 2017, was the 12-year anniversary of Advent Rising. So to celebrate this, even though it's a couple days late, I'd like you guys to join me in sharing your favorite memories from Advent Rising, whether you actually played it or not, like whether you heard about it from a friend or something like that. Go ahead and share it on Twitter with the hashtag adventanniversary. I will be doing the same. You guys should do it, and I think that would be a really good way to get some attention on this game. Also, as I said before, I highly recommend this game for anybody who hasn't tried it. It's only $6 on GOG, at least when I recorded this. It might have changed since then, but it's still pretty damn cheap. It's $10 on Steam if it went up in GOG or something like that. But yeah, join me in celebrating this game that really just doesn't get as much attention as it deserves. If we can get enough people talking about this game and playing this game, then maybe something can come out of it, and maybe we can hear from the people who are important, like Donald Mustard, about the future of the franchise. Also, if you liked the video, go ahead and leave a like and subscribe to our channel if you want to see more stuff like this. I've done other reviews like this in the past, and I'm going to continue to do reviews like this. Speaking of which, I want you guys to help me decide what game I'm going to review next. I'm going to give you guys 3 options. The first game is called Gun. It's a Western third-person shooter, also a first-person shooter. It's kind of weird, from Neversoft, the guys who made the Tony Hawk games, and it was actually released as a launch title for the Xbox 360. The second game that I could possibly review is Chronicles of Riddick: Escape from Butcher Bay, which is one of my personal favorite games. I'm going to be playing the original Xbox version, not the 360 version with Dark Athena. That might come up in the review, but I'll probably just stick to the original Xbox version and just look back at that game because it's one of my favorites and I would love to review it. And the last game is a game that I remember my brother playing a lot, and I remember watching him, but I don't actually think I played it that much myself. It's called Metal Arms: A Glitch in the System. It's a really fun and cute third-person shooter. It has a lot of style and just a lot of personality in it, and I would love to have a chance to go back and play it. So yeah, those are your 3 choices, and if you want to vote, you can leave a comment down below And you can also go to our Twitter page at PunchPunchMagic, where I will leave a poll for what game you guys want us to review next. That means you get 2 votes. Everybody gets 2 votes. You can vote in the comments, and you can vote in the poll. I will combine both results to see which one I should do. Also, while I'm talking about social media stuff, I wanted to remind you guys that I Twitch every Monday and Tuesday at 12 p.m. Eastern Time. That's noon Eastern Time, every Monday and Tuesday. And I stream various games. Sometimes I'll stream the games that I'm reviewing. Other times I'll just stream games that I want to play. For example, this past week I streamed Dragon's Dogma because I'd never really played it before and I wanted to give it a shot. But yeah, if you're new to the channel, thanks for watching this far in, especially. And if you're a veteran of the channel, you're somebody who's been subscribed for a while, thank you so much for the support. And I'll see you guys next time. Bye.